It happened in front of everyone, and even the laughter felt cruel. The year was 1986. The Beverly Hilton ballroom shimmered with gold chandeliers and cigarette haze. A private gathering of Hollywood's so-called action elite before the charity event Action Heroes Classic. The kind of night where tuxedos mingled with egos, and fame hummed louder than the jazz band playing near the stage. Sylvester Stallone was in the center of it all, sunglasses indoors, sleeves rolled up, drink in hand. He'd just finished talking about his next project, something bigger, louder, and meaner than Rambo. Cameras weren't rolling, but he played to the invisible audience anyway. Around him stood Van Damme, Lundgren, Seagal, a few producers, and stunt coordinators. Chuck Norris, dressed simply in a dark jacket and boots, stood near the edge of the group, quiet, almost out of place in his stillness. The conversation shifted from film to fighting. Someone joked about which of them could actually win in a real fight. The kind of joke that starts as harmless testosterone and ends with someone bleeding pride. "Come on," Stallone said, grin wide, voice thick with bourbon and confidence. "We all train, right? Van Damme's doing splits, Dolph's breaking boards, I'm punching meat. We're all real fighters now. It's not like the old days." He took a sip, paused just long enough for the room to lean in. "But Chuck here." He gestured loosely toward Norris. "He's like a monk who kicks. Maybe that worked in the 70s, but this is show business, not Sunday school." Laughter erupted, quick, nervous, contagious. Even those who respected Norris chuckled out of instinct, trying to blend in. Stallone basked in it, nodding, milking the moment. Then he added the line that cut the room in half. "I mean, come on, he fights like he's praying. We need fighters, not saints." The laughter this time was different, louder but hollow, bouncing off the walls with a metallic echo. It went on a beat too long, and then it stopped. Not because anyone told it to, but because the room felt the temperature drop. Chuck hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, but something in his presence shifted. The stillness turned heavy, like the calm that precedes a storm. Van Damme lowered his eyes. Lundgren shifted uneasily, pretending to check his watch. The band kept playing, a saxophone note quivering in the awkward silence. Even Stallone, realizing he might have gone too far, tried to smirk it off, but the smirk wavered. Chuck finally looked at him. Not the glare of a man insulted, but the gaze of someone measuring distance, not in feet, but in character. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that people leaned closer just to hear it. "You just confused strength with noise," he said. No one laughed this time. The sentence hit harder than any punch could have. It wasn't anger, it was precision. A verbal strike wrapped in composure. Chuck didn't raise his tone, didn't move an inch. He didn't need to. The words carried their own gravity. Stallone's grin faltered. He opened his mouth as if to reply, but the words didn't come. The tension stretched long and thin, everyone pretending to look elsewhere. A producer coughed. Someone whispered, "Jesus, man," another muttered. This just got serious. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had been playful macho banter now felt like the first spark of something much bigger, something that couldn't be dismissed with another joke. Chuck turned, nodded politely to one of the stuntmen, and walked away, slow, deliberate steps across the carpet. Every head followed him until he disappeared behind the ballroom doors. No slamming, no shouting, just silence, the kind that lingers long after the door closes. For the rest of the evening, the laughter never returned to full strength. Every drink, every joke that followed felt forced, like a party still pretending it hadn't already ended. And yet, outside that ballroom, the story was already moving. Someone had recorded the exchange on a small camcorder meant for behind-the-scenes footage. Someone else had whispered about it to a journalist before the night was over. By morning, it wouldn't just be gossip. It would be headlines. And everyone who'd been in that room would later say the same thing. It wasn't a joke anymore. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The story broke before sunrise. The tape, grainy, low contrast, recorded by someone who shouldn't have been filming, leaked to a small entertainment magazine. Within hours, it spread through every Los Angeles newsroom like wildfire through dry hills. One headline read, "Stallone mocks Norris. We need fighters, not saints." By noon, the morning radio shows were dissecting it. Callers argued over who'd win in a real fight. Hosts laughed about Hollywood tough guys, and publicists tried to contain the mess. But the damage was already done. For years, Chuck Norris had been the calm center of chaos in an industry that thrived on noise. He was respected, even by those who didn't understand him. But now he'd been dragged into the circus. The contrast between them became a headline in itself, the fighter versus the philosopher. In a dim newsroom downtown, an editor tapped his pen against the desk. "Make it a rivalry," he told his staff. "People love rivalries." Someone added, "Call it the Saint versus the Stallion." Everyone laughed, and the phrase stuck. Meanwhile, somewhere far from the noise, Chuck was alone in his dojo. No cameras, no entourage, just the sound of bare feet sliding over the polished wooden floor. The morning light cut through the paper windows, streaking across his face as he moved, slow, deliberate, precise. Front kick, step back, exhale. Again. There was no anger in him, only control, the kind that doesn't show itself until it needs to. The silence in that room was the kind that grows around people who've spent years mastering themselves. A journalist who'd once trained there watched quietly from the corner, notebook untouched. After a long moment, he asked, "Are you going to respond?" Chuck didn't look at him. Another strike. Another breath. Finally, he said, "No." That single word carried more weight than any press statement could. But by the time the journalist drove back to the city, someone had already taken a photo. Chuck standing alone in his GI, one hand on his belt, face half in shadow. It landed on the front page of Martial Arts World Weekly with the caption, "The Saint keeps his silence." The story poured gasoline on the fire. Talk shows debated it. Columnists wrote about old-school honor versus modern ego. Some mocked Chuck's restraint. Others called it the ultimate form of power. Van Damme gave a cautious interview. "I respect them both. But Chuck, he doesn't fight for applause." Then Stallone spoke again. It was on a late-night show, his grin wide under the studio lights. The host asked if he regretted what he said. Stallone chuckled, shook his head. "Come on, man," he said, leaning into the mic. "It's all in good fun. I mean, Chuck's all about peace and humility. That's great. For yoga." The audience laughed, exactly as they were supposed to. Stallone looked pleased. But for those watching closely, and many were, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. In that moment, the rivalry transformed from rumor into challenge. Every producer, promoter, and sports journalist felt the same instinctive thrill. There was money, drama, and pride in this. 2 days later, the call came. An entertainment promoter reached out to both camps with an idea, a friendly exhibition, just a sparring match, all for charity, billed as the Icons Duel. Stallone agreed immediately. He couldn't resist the cameras, the narrative, the chance to prove his bravado wasn't just a movie script. His agent told reporters, "Slice not looking for blood, just respect." Chuck stayed silent for 3 days. When he finally spoke, it wasn't at a press conference. It was at a community gym in Texas, surrounded by local kids. A reporter asked, "Will you accept the challenge?" Chuck tied the last child's glove, adjusted the strap, then looked up. "I didn't start it," he said, "but I'll finish it." That was all. The clip aired on every network within hours. The next morning, the headlines screamed again. Chuck Norris accepts Stallone's challenge. "I'll finish it." For the first time in years, the public didn't see Chuck as untouchable or distant. They saw a man whose calm had been provoked, whose silence had turned into something sharper, something dangerous. The press framed it like a boxing promo, but those who truly knew him understood. This wasn't about ego. It was about principle. Behind closed doors, Chuck's longtime trainer tried to dissuade him. "You don't owe the world this fight," he said. "You're beyond proving anything." Chuck just looked down at his hands, the same hands that had broken boards, held his children, and taught discipline to hundreds. "It's not about proving," he said quietly. "It's about reminding." The old wooden dojo echoed with the sound of a single kick, the sharp crack of focus meeting purpose. Outside, a storm was brewing, one of cameras, headlines, and expectations. But inside that calm center, Chuck's mind was still. The fire had spread, yes, but only one of them truly knew what flames could do. And in the distance, under the noise of Los Angeles traffic, the world was already waiting for the sound of the bell. The night of the event came faster than anyone expected. They called it the friendly exhibition. On paper, It was a charity match, a chance to raise funds, shake hands, and smile for cameras. But everyone in Los Angeles knew better. The posters might have said for a good cause, but the faces on those posters told another story entirely. Two men, two eras, one unspoken question. The Los Angeles Memorial Arena hadn't seen this kind of electricity in years. Outside, floodlights carved through the smog, illuminating crowds that wrapped around the block. Some held signs, Team Chuck, Stallone strong, the Saint versus the Stallion. Others just wanted to witness history. Inside, the air buzzed. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of security boots, the click of reporters setting up cameras, the murmur of producers whispering about ratings. The ring gleamed under white lights, clean and perfect, waiting to be marked by something that couldn't be scripted. Stallone arrived first. He made an entrance worthy of his legend. Leather jacket over a custom tracksuit, dark shades hiding his eyes. He waved to the crowd, grinning, pretending to keep it casual. But the jaw tension gave him away. He wasn't relaxed. Not tonight. Don't worry, folks, he said into the mic, voice booming. We're just going to keep it clean. I don't want to hurt your childhood hero. The crowd laughed, but not all of them. Some cheers faded into uneasy silence. Even those who idolized him could feel the tone was off. It wasn't confidence anymore, it was cover. Meanwhile, down the hall, Chuck sat in a quiet locker room. The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound. His robe hung neatly on a hook beside him. No entourage, no noise, just a folded towel and the slow rhythm of his breath. Across from him sat his old trainer, Joe, a man who'd been with him since the early karate circuit days. Joe watched as Chuck tightened the belt around his GI. You sure you want this, kid? Joe asked softly. He still called him kid, though they were both well past their youth. Chuck's eyes stayed on the knot he was tying. I didn't start it. Joe nodded, sighed. Yeah, he said, but you're going to finish it. Outside, the crowd roared. Stallone's name chanted like an anthem. Camera flashes burst in waves, flooding the arena with artificial lightning. Chuck stood up. The stillness around him broke just enough for a deep exhale. He walked to the mirror, studying the reflection, a face line not by age, but by discipline. He whispered something under his breath. Joe didn't catch it, but he saw the look in his student's eyes, a look he hadn't seen since the old tournament days, when losing wasn't an option, not because of pride, but because of principle. When Chuck finally stepped out of the tunnel, the noise shifted. It wasn't thunderous, it was alive. Fans rose to their feet, shouting his name, their voices blending into one solid sound. Chuck! 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 He didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked, calm, steady, each step measured. The closer he got to the ring, the louder it grew, until it was a living heartbeat pounding through the walls. Stallone turned as he entered, smirk tugging at his mouth. He leaned over the ropes. Man, I thought you'd bring a choir. Chuck looked up at him. No smirk, no glare. Just that same quiet weight that had once silenced a Hollywood ballroom. In the front rows, cameras clicked like insects. One photographer whispered, "This is unreal. It feels like watching history hold its breath." The referee called them to the center. The rules were simple. 2 rounds, light contact, no knockouts. Charity, they said. But no one in that building believed that for a second. The 2 men stood face to face. The difference between them was stark. Stallone's muscles flexed under studio lighting, skin glistening with oil, movements theatrical. Chuck stood unadorned, barefoot, eyes steady, posture unshakable. Stallone leaned closer, speaking low enough that only Chuck could hear. Let's see if saints can bleed. The words landed like a slap in a church. Chuck blinked once, slowly. His gaze didn't waver. No reply, no twitch. Just silence, the kind that unnerves even the loudest men. From the stands came a lone shout. Kick him once for Bruce Lee. The crowd erupted again. Laughter, cheers, the fever of spectacle returning. But Chuck didn't move. He simply adjusted his stance, exhaled, and bowed slightly toward the referee. It wasn't just respect, it was grounding, ritual, reminder. The bell hadn't rung yet, but in his mind, the fight had already begun. Not against the man in front of him, but against the noise itself. The referee stepped back. The crowd hushed. Stallone rolled his shoulders, bouncing on his heels like a boxer before the first bell. You ready, preacher? He muttered. And for the first time that night, something flickered in Chuck's eyes. Not rage, not pride, but an old, forgotten spark. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. The bell rang, and the sound of it, sharp, metallic, final, cut through the arena like lightning through silence. Every camera, every spectator, every heartbeat froze on that instant. Whatever this night had started as, it wasn't charity anymore. It was truth. The bell rang, and for a heartbeat, the entire arena froze. Thousands of people holding their breath, waiting for the script to begin. But there was no script. Stallone came forward first, gloves raised, shoulders rolling like a boxer who'd memorized his own myth. His steps were heavy, deliberate, all confidence and muscle memory. To most in the audience, it still looked like showmanship. But to Chuck, the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't performance. It was intent. The first jab came fast, sharper than expected. It sliced through the air and caught Chuck across the shoulder. The crowd gasped, thinking it was a staged hit, until they saw Stallone's eyes. There was no wink, no grin, no signal that this was part of the act. It was real. The sound changed. The laughter died. Even the cameras seemed to go quiet, as if the lens itself didn't know whether it should keep rolling. Stallone pressed forward again, left, right, hook. The man moved like he had something to prove, and every strike said the same thing. I can still be the strongest one in the room. One blow brushed past Chuck's jaw, just enough to sting. He didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed, not from pain, but disappointment. He thought, he's actually trying to hurt me. It wasn't rage that filled him, but a hollow kind of sadness. Years of discipline, philosophy, and respect, all undone by a man who thought power meant noise. Across the ring, Stallone smirked, breath loud, taunting. "Come on, preacher," he shouted. "Show me something real." The words echoed against the walls, bouncing between the rafters and the silence of 1,000 stunned faces. Chuck didn't answer. He only moved his feet, small, precise shifts, conserving energy, reading angles, studying the storm before deciding where to stand. The next minute passed like an hour. The only sounds were the thud of feet on canvas, the hiss of breath, the brush of fabric. Each time Stallone swung, Chuck slipped just outside the line, never countering, never escalating. The restraint itself was louder than any strike could have been. People in the front rows leaned forward, whispering, "Why isn't he fighting back? What's he doing? Is he scared?" But those who trained, those who understood the language of patience, saw it, the calm inside the chaos. Chuck was letting him burn himself out, not in the body, but in the mind. Stallone's movements grew harsher, less fluid. His face flushed red. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The silence around him started to feel hostile. The crowd wasn't cheering anymore. They were watching. The tension became unbearable. Some fans shouted, desperate to break the stillness. "Finish him, Sly." Others countered, louder. "Let it go, Chuck." Two worlds clashed in that noise, the world of pride and the world of peace. Stallone threw another wild combination, shouting through the effort. "What's wrong, Saint? You out of miracles?" The mockery didn't land. It hung in the air, brittle and uncertain. Chuck stopped moving. He stood straight, eyes locked on his opponent, breathing slow, steady. The change was subtle but seismic. You could feel it ripple through the arena, the moment before a wave hits the shore. When he finally spoke, his voice was so calm it chilled the blood. "You wanted real," he said. "Remember that." For the first time, Stallone hesitated. His stance wavered. But pride is a stubborn master. He growled, twisted his shoulders, and lunged, a wide, overconfident swing meant to end it. It never landed. In less than a blink, Chuck moved. A blur of precision, his body pivoting, right leg snapping out in perfect control, a movement as fluid as water and as sharp as truth. The impact wasn't cinematic. It didn't echo. It was quiet, the soft, efficient sound of mastery. Stallone dropped to one knee, gasping, eyes wide, more from shock than pain. For a second, nobody moved. Not the crowd, not the cameraman, not even Chuck. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of defeat, it was reverence. The kind of silence people keep when they realize they've just seen something honest, something unrepeatable. In that frozen second, the entire illusion of Hollywood toughness cracked open. There were no heroes, no villains, no scripts. Just two men, one who needed to win, and one who needed to remind the world that winning wasn't the point. The lights hummed overhead. Someone in the back coughed, breaking the trance. Chuck stepped back, giving Stallone room to rise. No gloating. No gestures. Just composure. Stallone's hand trembled slightly as he pressed it against the mat, trying to push himself up. Chuck watched him with quiet empathy, not triumph. He'd landed one strike, and it was enough. Because this wasn't a movie anymore. It was real. Stallone stayed on one knee longer than anyone expected. Not collapsed, not broken, just stalled, as if his body had reached a ledge he hadn't seen coming. His glove pressed to the canvas for balance. The other hovered in the air, undecided. The crowd didn't cheer. No one rose. The great machine of spectacle, so good at swallowing anything and spitting out noise, forgot how to make a sound. Chuck took one step back and stopped. Not to pose. To make room. The light above them hummed, turning sweat into silver. Somewhere in the upper bowl, a camera motor whirred and then clicked off, embarrassed by its own insistence. Shoes squeaked in the aisle and froze. Even the commentator at ringside lifted his headset an inch off his ear as if silence could be heard better without wires. Stallone lifted his head. The disbelief on his face wasn't theatrical, it was human. He wasn't hurt so much as surprised by the absence of story. There was no scripted comeback, no quip to bridge reality back to image. He searched for anger and found it smaller than pride, then reached for pride and found it smaller than the moment. He inhaled once, twice, deeper on the third, and pushed himself upright until he sat back on his heels, eyes level with Chuck's belt. Chuck looked down at him without triumph. The disappointment that had flickered earlier, the quiet, private kind that belongs to teachers and fathers, had drained into something gentler. He extended his hand. Not showy. Palm open, steady, the kind of hand that only ever offered two things, help or warning. Tonight it offered one. You forgot what fighting was for, he said. The sentence landed with the density of a verdict. It wasn't scolding. It was a reminder laid at the foot of a man who had built monuments to force. There was a murmur from the first rows, soft, uneven, as if people were agreeing with themselves in real time. In the VIP section, a veteran of the old karate circuits, white hair, quiet eyes, nodded once, the nod of someone seeing an old rule honored. Stallone's gaze flicked to the hand, then up to the face, then back to his own knees. Pride is stubborn, even when it's ready to surrender. He closed his eyes for a second like a man stepping into cold water, reached out, and took the hand. Chuck didn't haul him up. He let Stallone stand on his own power, only guiding balance when the leg wobbled. When Sly got his feet under him, he didn't let go immediately. He held the grip for an extra beat, as if measuring whether the lesson had reached the bone. Guess I did, Stallone said, quiet enough that it belonged to the space between them, and yet it traveled anyway. You could feel the words spread row by row, not as gossip, but as relief. Something human had been admitted. The arena exhaled. That was the first sound, an organism learning it could breathe again. No triumphant roar yet, no chant, just the complex texture of breath in 1,000 chests. After it came a single clap, far on the left, hesitant. It sounded wrong, and then right, and then it multiplied. The sound built from the edges inward, palms, fingertips, knuckles against chairs, the soft scrape of people standing. It wasn't the explosion of victory. It was the recognition of something decent. Chuck didn't milk it. He turned, guided Stallone 2 steps toward the nearest corner, then sat down on the apron with the grace of a man who knows how to leave space behind him. Stallone sat beside him, gloves on his knees, chest calming in slow descents. They stared at the canvas opposite, not at the cameras. For a long few seconds, they could have been alone in the room. Without stage directions, the moment arranged itself. The referee drifted back and stayed out of frame. The ringside photographer lowered his camera and let his own eyes keep it. In a front-row seat, an actress with a reputation for sharpness wiped her cheek and pretended it was sweat. The men on the apron didn't notice. They had returned to the oldest version of a ring, a small square where truth is permitted. You don't need to prove strength to be strong, Chuck said, not as a line, not as an aphorism, but as a fact remembered out loud. Stallone let out a laugh that hurt to hear. Not bitter, not defensive, tired. He shook his head, still looking at the floor. Next time, I'll remember that before opening my mouth. The line should have gotten a laugh. It didn't. It got something better, a warmth that moved through the crowd like a current connecting strangers. The applause finally cohered, slow, then full, then standing. People didn't slap hands because they wanted to be seen clapping. They clapped because their bodies needed to agree with what had just happened. Up by the tunnel, a producer tugged at a headset and whispered frantically to a stage manager. "Do we cut to break?" The stage manager didn't answer. He was watching the ring with his mouth open. On the commentary desk, a color man known for bombast sat forward, both hands flat on the table. "What you're seeing," he said softly to millions who could barely hear him over the room, "is what it looks like when men choose respect." On the apron, Chuck rested his forearms on his thighs, posture like a monk at rest. Stallone mimicked him without meaning to. Sweat cooled on their backs. The arena's air system sighed. Then came the inevitable clatter of entering story. A reporter ducking under the bottom rope, hair perfect, mic hot, breathless with opportunity. "Chuck, Chuck, the world's watching," he called, voice high from running. "What do you call this fight?" Chuck turned his head a fraction, the way people do when they are asked to translate something that doesn't belong in a paragraph. He could have said charity, exhibition, misunderstanding. He let the question sit until it felt less like bait and more like an invitation. Then he answered with the single syllable that fitted the shape of the night. "A lesson." The crowd didn't erupt right away. The word needed to settle. When it did, the ovation that followed shook dust out of rafters. An ovation that wasn't purely for Chuck, or even for Stallone, but for the chance to believe that the culture they built from staged violence could still recognize the real metric of victory. Stallone tapped a glove lightly against Chuck's shoulder. A half punch, half thank you. "You know," he said, the old grin trying to find a place on a new face, "you just gave me a better ending than any screenwriter." Chuck's mouth twitched. "Use it well." Camera crews swarmed the apron now, but when their lenses got close, the men's backs looked like a wall the pictures couldn't climb. The angle that mattered was invisible, the turn inside a mind that had been living too long in applause. In the lower bowl, a boy in a faded dojo tee tugged his father's sleeve. What did he teach him? The father didn't answer right away. He watched the two men sit and breathe. "That winning isn't the same as being right," he said, finally. "And sometimes being right means stepping back." Security motioned for the reporter to clear. He took a last shot. "Sly, any comment?" And got one, a nod. Not the kind that feeds a headline, the kind that satisfies a conscience. The reporter moved on, looking for faces that would cry on camera. There were plenty, but not the ones he wanted. Up high, the old karate veteran stood and started clapping above his head, rhythm slow, ceremonial. Others followed. It became a pulse. The ring absorbed it. The men on the apron stayed seated until the beat felt like a benediction rather than a demand. When they finally stood, it was together. No raised arms, no referee holding wrists. Just two men getting to their feet because it was time. They faced each other again, but now the distance between them was different in quality, not in inches. Stallone lifted his glove. Chuck touched it with his open hand. No bow, but the air felt bowed around them anyway. As they turned to exit, the ringside aisle opened. People reached instinctively, then pulled their hands back, as if the moment needed to pass untouched. Near the steps, a studio executive, expensive suit, eyes calculating, leaned in. "We should talk," he said to Stallone, meaning deals, meaning documentaries, meaning 100 ways to bottle what had just escaped them. Stallone smiled without teeth and kept walking. Back in the tunnel shadow, where the air cooled and the sound of the crowd softened into ocean, Joe was waiting. He didn't say "good job" or "you had me scared." He just squeezed Chuck's shoulder once. It was more than enough. Halfway down the tunnel, Stallone slowed. "Hey," he called. Chuck turned. Under the harsh fluorescent, they both looked older and more precise. "Thank you," Stallone said, leaving the rest implied. Chuck nodded. "Remember it," he said. A production assistant hustled by with a clipboard and a crisis. A boom mic dipped and withdrew. Somewhere on the floor, a janitor checked his watch, knowing he would be sweeping confetti that never fell. Out in the arena, the chant started again, not the old kind, not the hero worship kind. Softer. Respect. It rolled and gathered, built without frenzy, like a tide choosing to rise. In the ring, alone now, the referee bent to check the canvas, as if it might hold a scuff that would explain what had happened. It didn't. Near the commentary table, a young reporter who'd missed his shot scribbled a line anyway. No blood, no knockout, no victory dance. And yet everyone who left swore they'd seen a fight worth remembering. On the big screen suspended over the ring, the production team tried to find highlights, but every replay that mattered was quiet. A glance, a hand offered, a man sitting down next to the man he'd just humbled. They froze on that frame and let it hang longer than any punch clip would have earned. Down the hall, Chuck paused at the locker room door and looked back once toward the ring he'd just left. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The work wasn't to enjoy, it was to carry. He pushed the door and vanished into the hum of fluorescent lights, into the smallness where strength is kept. Stallone didn't go to the press area. He found a bench in a side corridor, sat with elbows on knees, and let the adrenaline leak out of him. A young assistant hovered, unsure whether to offer water or distance. "You okay, Mr. Stallone?" she asked at last. He nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. "Better than that," he said, surprising himself. On the arena floor, a final wave of applause washed the empty ring and spent itself against the boards. People began to talk again, voices climbing back toward ordinary. Tickets were folded, programs pocketed, opinions reheated. But the center of the night remained still, an untouched square where a single word kept echoing underneath everything. Lesson. A camera operator lingered long after his director cut the feed. He let the red tally light go dark and shouldered the rig anyway, framing one last shot for no broadcast at all. The aisle where two men had walked out side by side, leaving a space behind them that felt larger than the room could hold. Backstage, a producer stopped Chuck before he could disappear completely. "The world will want a name for this," he said, searching for angles. "What do we call it? Rematch? Redemption? Rivalry?" Chuck met his eyes, kind but immovable. "Call it what you want," he said. "Just don't forget why it happened." The producer opened his mouth to ask why, then closed it. He had the footage. He didn't have the answer. In the arena, as the house lights rose and the first ushers waved the first row toward the exits, the applause finally found an ending. Not a snap, not a cut, just a fade, like surf drawing back from a clean shore. The ring stood empty under the bright lights, looking exactly the same and nothing like itself. From the tunnel, a last ripple of sound reached the floor. Two men laughing, low, tired, uncomplicated. It folded into the building and was gone. No one would agree on the score of the match. No one would care. What stayed was the image, two silhouettes on the edge of the apron, sitting with their backs to the noise, followed by a single exchange the microphones hadn't missed. "What do you call this fight?" "A lesson." By sunrise, Los Angeles was already replaying the moment on every screen it could find. Cafes, gyms, and airport lounges, all tuned to the same clip. Stallone dropping to one knee, Chuck stepping back, the hand extended, the silence that swallowed an entire arena. There were no pyrotechnics, no soundtrack, just the truth caught in high definition. The headlines competed to define it. The kick that humbled Hollywood. No ego in the ring. Two lions, one lesson. But none of them quite captured what people had seen. Because what happened wasn't just a fight. It was something raw and unfamiliar. A man refusing to play the part everyone wanted him to. Radio hosts tried to make sense of it. Callers flooded lines. Some laughed, some confessed they'd cried. One ex-Marine said it reminded him of discipline before glory. Another caller said, he didn't win. He taught. On TV, analysts dissected the scene like a sacred text. Slow-motion replays froze on Chuck's eyes, his posture, the moment after the strike. Not the hit itself, the stillness that followed. The world seemed obsessed with that frame. Two men sitting side by side on the edge of the ring. The fight drained out of everything but respect. Across town, Stallone faced the cameras first. No makeup, no bravado. Just a black t-shirt and a face still marked with exhaustion. "I went in to prove I could still fight," he said. But he proved something better, that fighting isn't the same as strength. He looked down, then added softly, "He didn't beat me. He reminded me who he used to be." The journalists didn't interrupt. For once, no one wanted a soundbite. Meanwhile, in a quiet Texas dojo 1,000 miles away, Chuck unlocked the same door he'd opened every morning for decades. The wood creaked, the hinges sighed. Inside, The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Sunlight fell in narrow bands across the tatami, revealing footprints left from another generation. He dropped his gym bag beside the wall and stood for a moment, just listening, to the hum of silence, to the memory of that arena. Then he looked up. On the far wall, framed photographs waited like sentinels. His father holding a belt. A tournament from 1972. And right in the center, himself and Bruce Lee, both younger, both grinning like they knew something the world didn't. He brushed his thumb over the glass and smiled faintly. A soft knock came at the door. Joe stepped in, barefoot, quiet as always. No cameras, no congratulations. Just that familiar nod between two men who've spent more of their lives in silence than in applause. Chuck returned the nod. The ritual began, bows, stretches, then the first slow kick. Controlled. Centered. The sound of soul meeting mat, a single clean thap. They didn't talk for a long time. Outside, the world was screaming his name. Inside, there was only the rhythm of breath and balance. By noon, phone lines in the small office beside the dojo rang nonstop. Agents, producers, talk shows, all wanted their piece of the story. A documentary deal, Joe said, sorting the messages. They're calling it The Saint and the Soldier. Chuck didn't respond. He was sweeping the floor, methodically, as if dusting off something bigger than the room. When Joe finally asked, "You gonna answer any of them?" Chuck said quietly, "You don't polish truth. You let it settle." Across the country, TV networks were trying to package that truth. A primetime special aired that night. The lesson, Stallone versus Norris. The footage ran without commentary, only the arena's natural sound, the hum of the crowd before, the breath between strikes, the silence after the fall. Viewers leaned closer to their screens, waiting for a punchline that never came. One station added a voiceover at the end, almost whispering, "In a world obsessed with proving strength, the strongest man is the one who doesn't need to." That line was replayed everywhere, from podcasts to pulpit sermons. Martial arts schools printed it on posters. A teacher in Ohio hung it above his gym mirror, right next to a photo of the two men sitting on the ring's edge. Even Stallone's studio tried to capitalize, pitching sequels and redemption stories. He refused. "You can't sell that," he told them. "You just remember it." The next morning, he called Chuck. No publicists, no entourage. Just two old fighters, one phone line. "They want a rematch," Stallone said with a half-laugh. Chuck's answer was steady. "Then they didn't learn the lesson." A pause. Then both men laughed, that tired, honest kind that only comes after something real. By evening, the frenzy began to fade. The news cycle shifted, but something lingered. Clips of that moment stayed pinned on message boards, shared quietly among people who weren't interested in celebrity. A janitor in Chicago played it on his phone during lunch. A soldier overseas watched it before a mission. A teenage boy rewound it over and over, not for the kick, but for what came after. In time, the story became legend. Retold, reshaped, misremembered, but never forgotten. They'd say Chuck humbled Stallone. Others said he saved him. The truth was simpler. Two men found the line between strength and ego and stepped back from it together. Weeks later, a journalist visited the dojo, hoping for one last interview. Chuck greeted him politely, offered tea, and listened as the man explained the world still wanted a name for the fight. "People are calling it the redemption bout," the reporter said. "Do you have a better one?" Chuck looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "I'm not naming it," he said. "Lessons don't need titles." The reporter smiled awkwardly. "So what should they remember it as?" Chuck looked back at him. As the night silence won. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the windows amber. The reporter packed his recorder, unsure if he understood what had just been said. Chuck returned to the mat, bare feet whispering against the floor. A new student was waiting. He bowed. The student bowed back. Then came the soft rhythm. Heel, pivot, breath, kick. The same quiet discipline that had carried him through every storm. Somewhere, a TV in a diner replayed that old clip again. The cook paused, turned up the volume, and shook his head. "Man didn't even need to throw a second punch," he muttered. Maybe that's how legends really grow, not through noise, but through the echo of restraint, through the silence that stays long after the crowd has gone home. Because Stallone had wanted a fight. What he got, what everyone got, was a reminder that true power doesn't shout. It simply stands, offers a hand, and teaches.